The Icelandic Roots community is always interested in better understanding Iceland's history, but also its present, and then the future as well of this island nation. And farming is an integral part of Icelandic life. Now, you have grown up in the Westfjords on a dairy farm, and also then gone on to agriculture school, and then now live near Búðardalur, working on road construction, cattle driving. Over the last few days together, we've had many discussions about life and farming here in your country, but also like in North America, and really just in the world in general. And we can talk about these things, but I would like to first ask you, actually, why did you want to host me? Why were you willing to host me here and take me around? We've met some local farmers, gone to some cool nature areas. What interests you about connecting with Western Icelanders and just connecting with other people in general and talking about your country, sharing information about these places? What interests you about that?
I think for me, it's really important to keep up with, even though your roots are here and like it's you that are looking back to like your family and your history.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for Icelanders to like welcome the West Icelandic community and like get stronger ties with them, because I wouldn't say exactly like it's because of like family ties, but it's like we're bound by being from the same nation like back in the days.
Mm-hmm.
And also just being able to show my area as like, I wouldn't say it's advertising the area, but it's just showing the area and what it offers. So for other West Icelanders to be able to come over here, view this community, and see the possibilities that this certain area and region here, the Dalir region in the west of Iceland, has to offer.
Mm.
But it's also because I think it's important that we keep connected to like old tradition and like having, for example, all of the old ways, that we remember them, because we have to realize that where we are now, it's because we've built upon the community that was before us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to keep this connection and be able to have people over from Canada and the States and just other countries where Icelanders have moved.
Yeah.
And be able to like show them around, and if they want to come here and visit, it's wonderful to be able to help them get that chance.
Mm-hmm.
See the smaller community also, not only Reykjavik or like this Golden Circle, but they're able to go to like the west of Iceland.
Yeah.
And just view the Icelandic nature itself.
Mm-hmm. And to be able to meet more local people, which is something that you do miss if you are just a tourist. I mean, I think Icelanders are so welcoming that as a tourist with no family connections here, you can still go out of your way and make those connections, meet the local people, have those experiences. But it is a lot easier to have someone like yourself who can help with that. And that is how you really learn about a culture. So I would say I very much appreciate that. And I know any other Western Icelander or tourist in general really appreciates the hospitality of people like yourself and embracing these connections and sharing about your country. Now, I would also think that because you had an opportunity to visit Canada and go there as an Icelander and meet people who live in Canada and the United States as descendants of Icelanders, that this is maybe you kind of know both sides of it, and you've seen the hospitality visiting North American places as well. So maybe could you talk a little bit about your experiences visiting United States and Canada?
Yeah, so when we went over, we started up in like Washington, D.C. area. Mm-hmm. And like I say, it's so, the hospitality, like you say, it's so welcoming. When we entered there for the first time, Veronica, the woman that we stayed with, She was waiting for us at the airport, and already it was just like such a good connection and the hospitality everywhere. And then we continued up to like Canada and up through Canada all the way up to Halifax. But everywhere we came, all the people were ready to just take us in and show us around. It's the same kind of like you feel like a little responsibility to be able to allow Canadians to experience the same here, because they're so welcoming. When we went over there back in 2018, when I went as a Snorri West program, with the Snorri West program over, it helps that like all that hospitality, it was so nice, and like you felt you were a part of like the West Icelandic community being over there. So I think it's really important to be able to show the same hospitality and show Canadians around here, and like you say, being able to give them like more experience than just the tourist experience, being able to show them like farm life here in Iceland. And I think it also helps to bring awareness, and it's really important for me, being from a farm and like in this farming community of Iceland, to be able to bring awareness of like the agricultural practices that we have here in Iceland, and all these strict rules we have about agriculture and why we have them for importing meat and stuff. And also all the rules we have about like keeping animals and how you have to follow it all. It's all about bringing more awareness to the farming side of Iceland also, because as a tourist you would maybe just stop at a few places, take picture of horses or sheep out in the field, and then continue on. You wouldn't get to like meet the farmers themselves and see the like interior of farming in Iceland.
But even so, there are more opportunities for tourists, like that dairy farm with the wonderful ice cream, which the name was again?
It was Erpstaðir.
Erpstaðir,
It's like an ice cream factory, dairy farm.
And I think actually a lot of people listening to this might be familiar and maybe have gone there. But for those that haven't, you walk in and it's like a shop front. You buy the ice cream there, or scare, or even meat, I think they sell too. And you can see the dairy cows just right behind. And it's something where, from what I understand, tourists can just go in and actually see the cows, and it's all open. And so there are, like, even without getting these immersive local experiences, there's still like more opportunity to get connected to the farming here than in most countries as a tourist. And I think that really shows just how much Icelanders embrace and just understand that this is so much a part of Icelandic life.
I think it really helps that we are such a small country and we have farming all over the country. So it really helps that wherever you're driving, you always drive by a farm. Whereas if you would go over to bigger cities, you might enter the airfield, and you might go from the airfield up to your hotel. You might drive around the city itself, but you would never, like, even if you're traveling around the city, you would never go out to the farmland that is around it. Whereas in Iceland, you have these small towns. So as soon as you drive out of Reykjavik, you start seeing like farm life and animals.
I would like to continue to talk about farming with you. You've really just shared a lot of insights to me, and I've learned a lot from spending some time here with you. But I would also like to ask you about Laxdæla,
the Icelandic saga of Laxdæla,
from this region, and that's another big component of learning about Iceland, is understanding the sagas as well, and that really illuminates the past history of these places and then the present as well too, because so many places that you go to have these connections to sagas, and different regions have those. So maybe you could talk a bit about that as it pertains to this area here.
It's like I said with the farm names, that you can trace the farm all the way back to the Laxdæla, the Viking era, where the Vikings lived on the farms here in this area. So we know approximately, even though maybe like the main house has moved in the farm,
Yeah.
We know approximately the place where the Vikings were every time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are places like Melkorkustaðir which have been lost to us, so we don't know exactly where that farm itself was. But other farms we have, like Höskuldsstaðir, still stand where Höskuldur used to live. And so we can trace all of the history. For example, as an Icelander living in this area, when I was a kid, I didn't live in this area and I just read it for school and didn't think much about it. But then again, when I got older and started living here in this area and had lived here for like 1 year and a half, I started reading Laxdæla again and realizing how amazing it is that we have all this history written down, so we're able to like walk the same path between farms. We're able to think about it much closer than most history would offer us, because in most times you might have some manuscript writing something down, but you might not know the exact place where people started looking for the exact place. Whereas in the valley, the Laxdæla, you can see the farms that come from the Icelandic sagas, and you can stand there and imagine where the Vikings were traveling to. And not only in that valley, but all here around in the Dali region are farms from Laxdæla. So you have the Viking era all over here, and it's so rich with history.
Yeah, another. Well, sometimes the sagas actually extend out of Iceland too, and in particular the Vinland sagas, right? The saga of the Greenlanders and then the Eric the Red, which also not too far from here is the Eric the Red area where I guess he lived and spent time here. But of course, the Vinland sagas are that connection to the
North America.
And so you went to the Lonso Meadows when you were in Canada. So what was that experience like, seeing that place?
I think it was really eye-opening. It was one of the main reasons that started me thinking on more the Icelandic sagas. Because as a kid, you just read them in school and you don't wonder that much about them. Of course, some people get fascinated by them, but I never thought too much about it until after going in the Snorri program. We went to Lonso Meadow for a week approximately, and we were able to be there when they were smelting iron from ore the same way as the Viking did 1,000 years before. And as a metalsmith myself, it was quite fascinating seeing like what they would do, like the traditional way of the Vikings to make metal from the ground itself. And I think that really started me on thinking more about like the Icelandic sagas and the Viking times. So after living here for like 1.5 years, I started reading Laxdæla mainly because I thought more of the Vikings, and it helped me just open up to this amazing thing. Because for an Icelander, I never thought about it as such. We just had these sagas. We had this easy access to the sagas without wondering about if it was some kind of a mystery, because everyone read it, so it wasn't like some new manuscript we just figured out. But then when you start to realize how important it is that we have all this history that's able to tell us all these different things from the Viking era, which we would never know if not for those manuscripts. I think it's really important to keep that and like continue with it over to the next generation and keep teaching it, so we won't just lose it out, because it's so important. It's such a big part of our heritage.
Yeah, that's actually really, really insightful the way you said that, because I also relate, but in the flip side of it. So there's been a lot that I have thought more about and appreciated more about North American history after coming to Iceland and spending time here. And it's really made me understand that in many instances, you actually have to leave where you're from, leave the place and the people and the culture that you know to better understand where you're from. And by going away, you can get some deeper insights about what makes it special about your community and your people. And also to not take certain things for granted, right? Like you say, if you just grow up reading the sagas in school, you may not realize how actually special they really are until you go to other places and see those connections in a different light. I would say also, too, and we've talked a lot about this as we've been out hiking and going for walks, is that it's easy also to like take for granted the environment that you have if you grow up in it and if you're used to it. And that's something that the nature here and the big areas away from, lots and lots of people and just getting out in touch with nature is something that's so special here in Iceland. And I think it's very important having that connection. I think that's also maybe why so many people more and more nowadays are interested in coming to Iceland, is just that kind of getting away from from just the busyness of modern life. Now, you're someone who's like still actually quite connected to modern life and technology and advancements and these sorts of things. Is there anything you can say to maybe just having that sort of balance? Like how you look at, I mean, you're also well traveled, as I experience a lot of Icelanders are. They'll go to different countries, they'll go to big cities, maybe New York or European, Scandinavian countries, but then they come back to Iceland and have this more of a rural lifestyle, but still everything's connected through the internet now today. So there's a lot of like different dynamics with that. But what's your experience with that? How do you feel for these sorts of things?
My experience with like using more modern technology, if, for example, it really helps with farming,
Yeah.
and the medicine side of it is really important. How we can help, like, do surgeries now that we couldn't do long ago,
Mm.
or not long ago even. Just like technology really embraces the change that is happening now. I think it's good for us to embrace that change instead of thinking too bad of it. But of course, like, technology can be for the good and bad. But I think for like the Icelandic communities, for example, uh, a good example is the COVID time here in
Hmm.
Iceland. That just before COVID, we had gotten a much better like internet connection in most places.
Right.
And so it really helped with COVID when people were really separated and couldn't be meeting up.
Uh-huh.
That you had good internet connection. We had FaceTime.
Mm.
You were able to connect with people and like keep in contact without having to meet up. And just technology has gone so far with, for example, you were able to order food from the store, so it was just prepared for you
Mm.
into a bag. You only had to pick up the bag instead of having to go into the store
Hmm.
and pick everything by hand. So a good example of like showing how modern technology has helped here
Yeah.
is how it has shown us, for example, in COVID times, how it helped us.
Hmm.
And with schooling and such, you were able to continue school through the technology.
Yeah, and do you think that older generations here are quick to embrace technology? Like, if you think about farmers in these different regions, how are they to respond to not only like internet technology, but just new innovations in machinery and these sorts of things? Do you think people really stay quite up to date with this sort of stuff here?
I think they try, but also technology goes faster and faster and faster in advancing.
Yeah.
So I think it can be quite hard for
Mm.
people to keep up with it, because they might buy some new technology and just the year after there's something new. So maybe it's not always the possibility.
Mm.
And for farmers, for example, since you talk about farmers, it's very easy to say that for farmers it opens up so many doors, because they're able to see all these different types of like not only new mechanism, but they can also see how they can use it for different scenarios, because you have videos, for example, and explaining straight from the factory, and even just on YouTube, for using different machines for different material, and also just different types of farming that we might not have thought of here in Iceland, that this offers us. But with technology and how it advances, I think it's always hard to keep up with it for older generation in any business, because it starts always getting faster and faster, and I think even in some cases the young generation can barely keep up with the technology advances, because some areas it jumps so quick. It's not even like taking a leap, it's like long jumping in such a short time that you really have to watch for it to not just lose out.
And there's, I guess, so much opportunities with advancements like this, but then also risks, right? You want to continue to modernize, but like you said, there's something really special in this community connection between, well, within the community of Iceland here. And really, as much as it's all a big country, it's really sometimes like a small community. Like you're saying, you know people in the east of Iceland, in the west, south, and you can be driving in these different areas and just like know a car that drives past on the street. And there really is like this small sense of community that feels so wholesome, especially when you come from places in North America or the rest of Europe, where living in big cities or living in rural areas, you're starting to, I don't know if you lose that sense of community or it just gets diluted. The more and more people there is, and the bigger we expand our communities. So as much as it's important to have that opportunity to modernize, it's important to keep tradition, like you say, and then sharing that tradition with others, and also like staying connected to the land, which I find Icelandic people seem really easy to do, is just to stay connected to the land and to their roots. I think it's because of things like what we've talked about, the connection to history through the sagas, and then just the farming practices. Now, I have had actually a few conversations with older generations here in Iceland that have told me their concerns for younger people not wanting to take over farming. This is something that happens in Canada and the United States too, is, their children will grow up and go get jobs in the city, and then these farms are no longer being ran by the families. What is that like here in Iceland? And is it true for these older folks to have this concern? Do you think a lot of the younger generation doesn't want to continue farming?
I think it really depends, because the hard thing is that most of the cases, because of, like you say, the technological advancements, everything advancing, and I think the size of the farms have started to need to advance also. For example, not long ago you could see farms in Iceland with 30 cows and less, and now it's becoming the thing that they're going up to like 60 or 70 cows. Whereas everything is getting like a little larger. Sheep farms are getting larger, and I think it's more that the younger generations have a hard time taking over a small farm and then having to build it up. Whereas it's easier to take over like a bigger farm. But also the cost of farmland and farms in Iceland is quite high. So you have to find the right balance that you're looking for to be able to buy the farm and start farming. So I think it really depends on a few factors, and also concerned to like, is the farm far from school and such? Because of course young people start thinking about when they have family, or if they have like family, they start wondering like, where would I send my kids to school? Is it like a rough terrain? Will it be like a long ride? is it like hard to like have to wake up like 1 hour before school just to drive all the way to school?
Mhm.
And a lot of things have started to play into it, with some of the farms being more and more rural, and also the smaller schools in Iceland, in like smaller communities where they close down and it moves the kids over to the next school, and it may be even farther away.
Yeah, yeah.
So an important thing for the younger generation is like the availability of how far is it to the store, or how many farms are there around, because it
Mhm.
can also be hard for people, for example, wanting to start farming in the middle of the Westfjords, where maybe one or two other farms is, and that's it for like a long distance, where the young generation start farming and they don't have the same community around them that they're used to, or like they have gone to school and been, for example, in agriculture university, where a lot of farmers stay, and you might not realize when you've only been in like that small secluded area.
Mhm.
But I think an important factor of everything is to have a good community. So
Yeah.
being like secluded in that point, you might not realize it, but after going to college and school, college and university,
Mhm.
and then you come back, you start to realize how much smaller it is than you're used to after being in college and university.
Mm.
So it might not be the area either that you want to be in. You might not necessarily be against taking over a farm,
Yeah.
but you might not like farming in that specific area
Right.
itself.
Yeah. And when you mentioned like smaller communities and schools and that, we had an experience at Búðardalur. We did a Icelandic roots ceremony there last year on the
Yeah.
trip. And, the local people there were saying like they have this building that's been a school, but I think they said it's now no longer a school, or if it is, there's like something like 8 kids that go there.
It's not a school anymore in
Mhm.
Búðardalur. So a lot of the smaller schools and like schools for communities that used to be bigger,
Mhm.
when when the communities got smaller, they started closing down like some of the schools.
Yeah.
Because of course it saves money not running like a school for only 3 or 4 kids.
Uh-huh.
Of course it makes it harder for farms that are really secluded or far away, if they have to send their children even further to
Mhm.
school.
Mhm. Interesting. And so, like you say, it's not necessarily that the next generation is not wanting to farm, but they're maybe thinking more about it. Whereas maybe in the past, you grow up on a farm and you don't really feel like you have the choice to move and go farm somewhere else. You just like naturally take over where it is. Whereas nowadays, maybe you go off to school or you just see more of the world and you see different opportunities and you think, maybe I don't want to farm in this region. I want to move here. So there's just more change, maybe, than previous generations have been used to. So you would not suggest that the future of Iceland is nobody farms anymore. There's still a large portion of younger people that are interested in this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that it will be still farming in Iceland, but I think it will change in the future to bigger farms than we're used to.
Yeah.
And it will also slowly move. Like we see areas that farming is dying out in,
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard terrain, or like really small communities,
Mm-hmm.
and the younger generations aren't taking over in those small communities. So I think we'll see more of like maybe a little bigger farming,
Mm.
but we'll see it in like bigger farm areas. So we'll
Yeah.
see more farming in certain areas where there is a lot of farms now. They will keep on being a lot of farms,
Mm-hmm.
and these smaller farms will slowly die out. And maybe instead of 2 farms in the future, we'll be looking at 1 farm.
Mm.
it, I think it will be closer, like farming will still continue, but most of it will be closer to population. For example, Eyjafjörður
Mm-hmm.
is a really good example, where there is a lot of farmland and it's all so close to Akureyri.
Mm.
I think that's what will keep on happening, is that the farms will get bigger and they will be closer to small towns or
Yeah.
cities.
Yeah. I mean, this is certainly what's happened and is continuing to happen in North America. And so, yeah, maybe the future then will be some of these regions changing over time. Maybe that would also mean like maybe some more areas then just go back to nature instead of continuously trying to farm an area that's just rough terrain or maybe not the best. That gets consolidated into these better farming areas and closer to city or town centers. And then maybe you get some other regions that could just be reforested then, or go back to nature, be hiking areas for tourism and that sort of thing. Now, I would also like to ask you about fish farming, which is something that I guess kind of takes two things, right? Farming and fishing, and puts them together, which is a sort of a newer concept for sure. And we were talking about this, and I've recently done a podcast with someone who's doing aquaponics in Iceland. And so, what is your thoughts on the fish farms and how that may change in the future as well?
Well, how it will change to the future, I think we'll see more of fish farming on land. So they will have more of it like on land instead of in the fjords.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it will be if they will completely stop having it in the fjords or what. But I think an important part we have to look at of fish farming is what it does for the communities it's in.
Mm.
For example, in the Westfjords, it creates a lot of jobs and job opportunities, not only just for the fish farming, but everything around it, like electricians. And then because of you're building more houses, you have smiths, you have plumbers, you have all types of jobs going up. And the people that move there for work or live there for work have children, so you have maybe more children in the school. It helps build the communities also. So it gives, how would I say, it gives the region they are in or the area they are in, it gives something to the areas, like a chance for more people to live there.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to look at it from so many point of views. For example, this that what is it giving to the community itself? But then of course there will be and there is and will be and continue to be research into what effect it has on the ocean and the area it's in. And mainly for that reason, I think it will be going more to land. So having fish farming on land instead of in the fjords. And then we can also look to like the Faroe Islands where they use the waste from the fish. So they use the manure from the fish or like the waste from the fish. They gather it and mix it with farm manure and use it as a fertilizer to bring more diverse fertilizer back into the ground. And I think that's one of the reasons it will go more into land farming is so it will be easier for them to gather up like everything that comes from the fish to mix it in with manure and be able to sell it to farmers. And that's something that we have to look more forward to is we have to look for more solution in fertilizing without having to move fertilizer across the world between countries instead of trying to make the most of it ourselves. So I think that's also an important aspect that we have to start thinking about because we see this big factory in the Faroe Islands where they're doing this. So I think it's something that we have to look forth and look towards in the future is to use everything. And already we have this big company like Kerecis in Iceland, which uses like what used to be a wasted product of the fish, but now they make like skin to help heal people. And we have the collagen and all this different type of products that used to be thrown away.
Yes.
Or even if they were used in so small amounts that nowadays we try to use everything of the fish, and this would just be the next step in it to use also the waste from the fish.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, something actually that we haven't talked about is greenhouses in Iceland. And this is something that maybe could have a connection to that too, right? If you have this larger scale fish farming, you can use what would normally be the waste products of the fish and then use that as fertilizers to help growing plants in greenhouses, perhaps. And so those two things could go hand in hand. But greenhouses here, of course, are a great use of the geothermal heat and also the hydroelectric energy. Is that something that you think could be expanded? And I guess I would have another question to that is Iceland, as much as there's like such good food to be produced here locally, I love the Icelandic lamb, the fish that you can get, and then the vegetables that you can get from the greenhouses too. But there's still a large import of food here. Maybe if you could talk a bit about the greenhouses and then also ponder the question of do you think Iceland could ever be fully self sustained with food? Of course, there's good to have trade between countries for globalization, economics, blah, blah, blah. But do you think it would be possible for Iceland to produce all of its food for its roughly 375,000 citizens produced just here in Iceland?
I think it's quite a good possibility because, uh, like you say, we import a lot of food, and maybe in the with like a little bit more diversity, we could be self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it always comes down to like trading. We would be selling like product from Iceland, fish, lamb, and different types of product that we make here. Cod oil, like the lise,
Yes.
and we sell that from Iceland. And we also get instead more diverse food, for example, that you don't grow here.
Mm-hmm.
And because of course we don't import a lot of meat or stuff, and we don't import like livestock,
Yeah.
so we have different type of meats that we maybe import for that little meat we import.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's always good to like have the diversity, and for example we import a lot of like fruits and different type of foods.
Yeah.
And I think we'll always do that. We'll never think, okay, now we'll stop import, because we'll always be importing something that we is easier to grow in other places.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's quite an open field with greenhouses and geothermal energy to put the heat. The main problem in Iceland might be like over the winter time because of less sunshine.
Right, right.
But over the summertime, like in the right place, you'd be able to have a greenhouse with geothermal energy and have a really good sunshine all day around to light it up. But over the winter time, it would be harder to grow something because you wouldn't have as much sunlight. And I think it's important to look towards the future with greenhouses in Iceland and like build upon it.
Yeah.
And we have really good like farmers in Iceland that have greenhouses and are growing tomatoes and different types of plants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're really lucky with how big it has come in Iceland already.
Yeah.
But I think we can grow even more. And for example, Icelanders grow a lot of potatoes nowadays, and we have a lot of different type of fruits and vegetables that we grow.
Mm-hmm.
A lot type of kale, and so I think the main question is like, how diverse do we want to be? Up to the point that is it paying off producing it in Iceland or importing it?
Yeah.
Because it's really good to be able to say, okay, we have enough for ourselves, but also like an Icelandic product is really nice. And I try to always choose Icelandic, even if it's like more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I most of the times I choose Icelandic if it's available.
Mm-hmm.
But with some things, it's so expensive to produce it that it would be smarter to import it, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And since we do export on fish and meat and different products, I think it's important to also import something to keep the balance between exporting and importing.
Yeah.
But for me, I think we'll never say we don't need to import more.
Yeah,
I
I
think
guess.
we'll always import like different type of food than what we make here.
Yeah, I think it's just an interesting idea to imagine that an island nation could produce all of its food, and I think certainly in theory that would be possible. Would it be necessary? Probably not, as you say. And then, of course, business relationships between countries is a good thing when you're trading food. And I still would love to see Icelandic lamb ending up on the grocery shelves where I live. That would be fantastic. And yeah, I know like they can grow bananas here, for example, in greenhouses, but it just would be so expensive to do that, to actually produce enough bananas to sell in the stores. They do it, I think, just kind of as like a experiment or just like a fun thing to grow. But you would need to produce a lot of bananas for baking all the banana bread, which I learned, by the way, here, which I don't know if this is just an Icelandic thing. Apparently other people in North America are familiar with this too, which is eating cheese with banana bread. This was sort of interesting, but I tried it for the first time here, and actually pretty good.
It's actually a must with banana bread to have a good cheese with it, and not like any cheese, but like a good cheese with banana bread never fails.
Something else interesting that you talked to me about is with regards to roads in Iceland and with tunnels. And you're of the view that Iceland should maybe make more tunnels, not only under water connecting fjords, but also tunneling through mountains. And you referenced the Faroe Islands as an example of having more tunnels. So that might be an interesting thing to talk about. I know coming here either as a tourist or visiting family or otherwise, you're often thrown off by the narrowness of the roads without having shoulders on the roads. But I'm also always impressed, at least, with the major highway and doing the ring road, is that these are like pretty good quality roads, despite the different types of weather that you get in Iceland, and even potentially earthquakes and disruptions with volcanic activity and that sort of thing. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
For me, I think the most important things about the tunnel is that it provides a lot of safety. For example, over winter time, in harsh winters when there's a lot of snow, you have the availability to go through the tunnels instead of having to take mountain pass. And I don't know if it's much recently, but actually, it's been for quite a long time that I've always thought about like the safety that tunnels offers instead of driving under mountain hills where you have the chances of an avalanche coming down, or you're driving in really bad weather and you barely see the front of the car, instead of being able to drive through a tunnel. And of course, it's expensive to drill tunnels, but in the long end, you look at the cost from clearing the road the whole winter. Instead of having a dry road inside a tunnel, you don't have to spend money on putting salt and sand on the road. You don't have to spend money on clearing it. So it takes time, but I think it pays in the end to have more tunnels than mountain passes. And also, like you say, crossing fjords, like big fjords, can be crossed by going underwater. And of course it really depends on like the traffic that is driving there, but most of the time I would say it really pays off to go under the fjord and ease the path of the traffic instead of having all the traffic going in the fjord. And like I say, some of our fjords have really steep hills, so you have a high risk of avalanches in some areas. And sometimes it's not only like a snow avalanche coming down. Sometimes it's just like in the spring or in the fall, there's so much rain that you have like a rocky slide or like a mud avalanche coming down instead. And then you have to clear the roads. And we've had problems with cars going in snow avalanches, and we've had problems of road being closed for long times because of all type of different weathers and stuff. So this would help provide safety and safe travels for people that would otherwise be stuck in one place and not be able to go because the road is closed, or the weather is just so bad that they don't trust themselves instead of driving just through the tunnels.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think the one just between, well, I don't know the name of that fjord, but once you leave from Reykjavik and then drive towards Borgarnes, that tunnel. Yeah, from what I understand, it was you would pay to go through it in the beginning until like the cost was covered, yeah?
It was Hvalfjarðargöng.
Yeah.
And so it used to be this company that drilled the tunnels and kept care of like charging everyone for driving through. And so it costed a certain amount to drive through every time you went through, until they had like paid up both like the starting cost of the tunnel and also paid up for like putting new asphalt on the roads and like fixing the tunnel up completely throughout the years, until they had finished paying up all cost. And then the government took over like taking care of the tunnel, or like the main road construction company of the government takes care of it from now on.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe could that sometimes make it controversial? Like Icelanders maybe don't want a tunnel if they think they're going to have to pay for it?
We have a tunnel in the north also where you drive through, then you pay for driving through it.
Yeah.
And that's quite recent that we got that tunnel. So, and for me, I would choose the tunnel over driving a mountain pass all day, even like in good summer weather. I would probably drive the tunnel instead, just because it's not that expensive.
Yeah.
And it helps like pay up the cost of that tunnel, and hopefully will help making like more pressure on more tunnels later on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we should now get into politics and talk about Austhor Magnusson. Could you actually talk about this character just a little bit?
Like talking about his character, like my point of view my point of view is like a certain view of it, but like I could go into the main ideas that he's been trying for presidency for 28 years, and which
is quite the commitment, gotta say.
And one of his main ideology is becoming like president of peace. But
also that seems noble.
Yeah, but for me, like, I don't know if I myself would vote him, and my ideas aren't exactly like
you don't like peace.
Yeah, I don't like peace. No, it's I wouldn't say it's that. It's just my ideas wouldn't be exactly the same as his. There are other candidates that I've voted before in other presidential elections. I've never voted for him himself, and like I wouldn't say it would be my responsibility to like tell people to be against him or be with him. But for me myself, I wouldn't like vote for him. But I could say definitely that he is a character. For better or worse, that's for each and everyone to like decide for their own.
Yeah, okay. I just found it interesting that, learning a little bit about Icelandic politics, you realize, there's just as interesting of characters and sometimes controversy and these sorts of things as there is in any other place. Sometimes you maybe think Iceland has this very like rational and just calm and basic politics, but I think you realize that politics here is kind of just like anywhere else in the world. But maybe you would say maybe there is a bit more of rationalness to Icelandic politics. It doesn't seem to get as totally crazy as elsewhere.
I think it really depends on the material that is being talked about each time. For example, in the parliament, or like in the Congress in the USA, or like Icelandic parliament. I think it really depends on like the heat behind the motives, and maybe because we don't have as many big cases as other nations, we seem like more relaxed. But I think it's like in the nature of politics to sometimes get heated and like controversial. Like you say, it can be quite controversial persons and even like the English word would be even with the like not only the people themselves but like their whole band of their whole group
and their,
like
their
public
followers
group and their followers.
Yeah.
It can be quite heated between like left and right and the middle ones. And even just between like one right arm and on another right arm, because it's always some materials that they don't agree with. And even sometimes inside the political parties, they don't agree with certain materials. So I think it's similar politics as in other countries, but the main difference might be that we don't have as many big heated issues going
dynamics.
on, and the dynamics aren't as big. There might be similar, but on a smaller scale to what other countries have.
Just a scale difference, but it does seem to be human nature that even in a very practical country full of farmers and fishermen in Iceland, you cannot avoid the human nature of politics and the debates and these sorts of things, which is maybe, I guess, just the beauty of democracy. This is just what happens with these things. Now, what to you is your favorite part of these rural communities in Iceland? Again, you've grown up in the Westfjords, which is maybe the most rural place in Iceland. Not to compare places, but certainly it's quite a remote area. What is your favorite thing? What is something that's special to you about these smaller rural communities?
I think it's basically the communities themselves and how close everyone can get. With the, for example, Þorrablót, when you go to celebrate the Þorri, that old month in Iceland, where you go and everyone you're meeting for the evening, it's someone from your communities, you know them all, and you're all having like good time together, and just going sheep herding or something, that you're able to have this connection with everyone in the community. And of course, some communities are smaller than others, and some are quite big. But I think especially like in rural areas of Iceland, or like in farm areas of Iceland, smaller region, you have these like tighter communities. It's something that like I think it binds to also with the farmers, that they farm the same land, they have sheep walking on the same land, so they work a lot together. And it really helps binding the community together and people helping the farmers, and just in total, I think it's the human nature of like smaller communities that is really fascinating for me.
And could you talk a bit about the nature of the Westfjords? Because this is an area that I think so many of us would love to visit, but it's often kept out of the tour itineraries, and it seems like this far-off place that's not accessible, and it's always going to be, I'll do that on the next trip or the next trip. So maybe if you could illuminate how the nature is in the Westfjords.
So I'll tell you a secret right away. The nature in the Westfjords, it's the most amazing place in the world. Like going to the Westfjords, you can just lose sight of time so easily. And for me, just going to the Westfjords, we have like small geothermal hot pools, or like even for like the small farming hotels all across the Westfjords, you're able to have this really close connection to the nature. And for me, it's like if I really want to relax, I try to go over to the Westfjords and take just a weekend or even a whole week in the Westfjords, where I just relax in the nature.
Yeah.
And literally, I would advise everyone that travels to Iceland to try to give themselves some time, at least 2 days, to go to the Westfjords, stay there, and spend a whole day in the Westfjords. Not only traveling around everywhere, but also just staying there and viewing the nature and spending time with the nature itself. Because, like I say, it's so rural, it's so far out of reach from other communities. Of course, we have like towns in the Westfjords and there are communities there, but in between, like sitting in one fjord where there isn't a town, even though there's a town in the next fjord over, you'll feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. There's such a good connection to the land itself. So for people that really want to go there and visit and see pure Icelandic nature, I would always recommend the Westfjords.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. And it really isn't actually that far. I mean, nothing in Iceland is really that far out of reach.
It's like a 4 to 5 hour drive, depending to where in the Westfjords you'd go.
Yeah.
From Reykjavik. So I really recommend it. It's shorter than going to like the east of Iceland.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, this has been great chatting with you, and really great talking with you all weekend here. I think, it's very insightful for us to be able to learn from people like yourself who have experience on the land here, but then also like experience outside of it and going to school and traveling around the island and doing different things. It's I think very important to understand life here. So as we wrap up, maybe I could ask you what hope you have or vision for the future, or excitement that you have for the future, for your own life or for Iceland, North American connections. Any sort of like inspiration or ideas or visions that come to you with that sort of notion.
For me, I think it'd be like something I've always wanted to do and planned to do after agriculture university but then COVID hit. Was traveling over to Canada and being able to like take part in farming there, since it's so different in scale to Icelandic farming. And of course like the summer allows you to grow different crops and such compared to Iceland. So I've always wanted to go, and like my big plan is to try to take some time to be able to go over there soon and have like this Canadian farming experience. And also try to do it like where I'll be able to also connect with like the Icelandic community in that area, just to learn more about like the sagas of the West Icelanders. Because it's like last time I went over to Canada was about a year and a half ago. And it was quite fascinating to be able to still, like every time I go over to Canada, you always learn, even if it was in Toronto area where I've been before, you still learn more and more about like Icelandic sagas in Canada. So I really wanted to go over there and get a good more connection to the West Icelandic communities and like learn more about the history of the communities.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, as you have experienced by visiting U.S. and Canada, I think we do really try to be open and welcome to visitors like yourself. So I hope that plan can unfurl for you. And I think the more that all different countries and communities and cultures and people can learn from each other, whether it's farmers learning about other farming practices, whatever it is, this just advances the world forward. Learning about the history, those connections, the present, and then developing for a better future for all of us. So as we wrap up here, could you maybe take us out with some wonderful Icelandic? Maybe a greeting or a quick story, or do you know any poems, or do you have some Icelandic poems off the memory or something like this?
Well, I have some Icelandic poems of my memory. I have this one short ljóð, which is about, for example, there's one about a tractor, which is Flottur hann Ferguson, fremstur á velli, landbúnaðar lífsins von, lifir óháð elli. So it's basically a short poem that I made about an old tractor we used to have on the farm back when I was younger. But since it's the 4th of May, we have an excuse to go over like the poem called Mæljóðið. Well, actually, it's the 5th of May, but still. So there's a poem in Iceland about like the 1st of May is the day that we fight for like better, like verkalýðsdagurinn, where we fight for like
equality.
Like in a workplace.
Yeah,
like,
workplace equality.
And like the quality of the pay and everything for people. And like the first verse goes. Og hver létt þitt skóhljóð, og hver lengi ég beið þín, það vorhreinn á glugga, nabur vindur sem hvín, en ég veit eina stjörnu sem skín, og nú loks ertu komin, þú komin til mín. Most of the other poems I have are just poems that I've written down myself.
Yeah.
So like the one with the tractor, it's a poem that I made when I was younger.
Thank you very much.
I'll just say thank you, bara takk kærlega fyrir og eigðu góðan dag. Thank you very much and have a nice day.